Mr. White. Yes, science.
You inverted?
Which scientists have learned how to control.
It's very simple.
Since completing our first analysis of Breaking Bad, we had a lot of requests to do a follow-up. We kind of resisted the idea because for a while there were rumors that the show's creators might be planning a new series. However, with Vince Gilligan turning his attention to Better Call Saul and turning down a reported $75 million offer from former DreamWorks founder Jeffrey Katzenberg to make 3 more episodes of Breaking Bad, it's safe to say that we have seen the last of the show. And in a way, that's a good thing, because it ended perfectly. There really is no need to touch it or revisit it, just leave it be, a high watermark in the history of television. That said, Better Call Saul, which is shaping up to be an amazing show in its own right, and pretty much acts as a prequel to Breaking Bad, is fast approaching the story arc where Saul, Walter, and Jesse inevitably cross paths. So perhaps we haven't seen the last of them on our screens after all.
Take it easy!
One other thing that must be pointed out is that this analysis will inevitably contain some spoilers. So if you've not seen Breaking Bad in its entirety, then stop this video and do yourself a favor and go and watch it. Also, if you have not seen our previous analysis, then perhaps go off and watch that, as we'll be expanding on some of the ideas and concepts in that video. You'll find a link in the description. For those that have seen our first analysis, then you'll be familiar with the idea that in the first 3 seasons of Breaking Bad at least, Walter White exists as what can best be described as a quantum character. The idea behind this draws on the long-standing dilemma of quantum physics with regards to the observation of subatomic particles, which seem to exist in multiple states of reality. For example, a photon of light which can behave both as a particle and a wave, depending on how it is being observed. This conceptual link to the idea of dual or simultaneous states was pretty much confirmed within the show when Walter takes the name of Heisenberg as his alias.
What's your name?
Heisenberg.
Werner Heisenberg was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who, along with Niels Bohr, in the years 1925 to 1927, developed one of the most commonly taught theories of quantum mechanics, known as the Copenhagen interpretation. It says that a quantum particle, and by extension reality, doesn't exist in one state or another, but in all of its possible states at once, a concept known as the superposition. It's only when we observe its state that a quantum particle is essentially forced to choose one probability, and that's the state or reality that we observe. Since it may be forced into a different observable state each time, this explains why a quantum particle behaves erratically. Werner Heisenberg's great contribution was in developing a theory known as the uncertainty principle and a working equation based around it that could be used within this context of the superposition theory to model, to measure, and describe the behavior of subatomic particles. But there was a catch. And the catch was uncertainty. You see, the more you attempt to understand and describe with any certainty one aspect of a subatomic particle's behavior, such as its velocity or speed, the less certain or more fuzzy your understanding becomes about other aspects such as its position or location in space. You can only really get to know with any certainty one side of the coin. We'll come back to Heisenberg later, but for now it's enough to say that his uncertainty principle acts as a metaphor for the evolution of Walter White from the show's protagonist to its antagonist Heisenberg, and the kind of superposition he occupies in the process between the two extremes of his personality. Mild-mannered family man and high school chemistry teacher versus ruthless criminal and meth cook. The more Walt discovers or learns about himself as Heisenberg, the fuzzier and distant his life as family man Walter White becomes. It's an experience we share with him as observers of the show. For much of seasons 1 to 3, the story arc revolves around this fuzziness and the conflict it creates for Walter White, specifically as to how he sees himself and his position in the world. The absurd situations he increasingly finds himself in as a result of his criminal activity quickly exposes the harsh reality that the two worlds he occupies cannot coexist. It is a paradox that he must face up to. With regards to this, we can turn back to quantum physics and a famous thought experiment devised by Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, known as Schrödinger's cat. The experiment was designed to illustrate the flaws of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics and the inherent absurdity of the idea that subatomic particles, and by extension reality, can exist in simultaneous states at once until observed. In the thought experiment, we are asked to imagine a cat placed inside a sealed box, along with a radioactive sample, a Geiger counter, and a bottle of poison. The Geiger counter is rigged to trigger a mechanism that will smash the bottle of poison, killing the cat, if it detects the radioactive material has decayed. Radioactive decay being a subatomic process. If the Copenhagen interpretation suggests the radioactive material can have simultaneously decayed and not decayed in the sealed environment, then it follows the cat too is both alive and dead until the box is opened and observed. And therein lies the paradox. Surely the cat cannot be alive and dead simultaneously. The idea is crazy, right? This was the purpose of Schrödinger's thought experiment, to illustrate the absurdity of the simultaneous state hypothesis. Either way, the paradox of Schrödinger's cat can only be resolved by the observer making a choice to become an active participant in the system and opening the box to take a peek inside. At which time, at least according to the Copenhagen interpretation, the superposition or wave function of the two possible realities collapse down into a singular, observable, and quantifiable reality. This is what's known as the observer effect. There's no such thing as a passive observer, you must participate. Think of it as the universe's way of saying you can't just sit on the fence with reality, you need to make a choice and be all in. Much of the conflict that Walt experiences is his inability or reluctance to be all in. The two cannot be one. He still thinks he can hedge his bets and balance the two states he occupies simultaneously. So as a result, in the first 3 seasons at least, he exists as this wave-like function of himself, oscillating between the extremes of 2 possible versions of himself and 2 possible worlds. The basis of our first analysis was the brilliant way in which the show's creators conveyed this. Whether it be visually through the use of reflected images and mirrors, or symbolically through such things as the toy eyeball Walt finds and strangely keeps at the start of Season 3, referencing the observer effect. There's also constant references to duality and dichotomy. One of the most memorable being the appearance of the twin assassins, known as the Cousins, who first make their appearance in Season 3 and journey up from Mexico in order to kill Walter White, or should we say, Heisenberg. From a visual point of view, they're pretty memorable, but there's a sense of otherworldly or supernatural about them as well. Like a lot of things in Breaking Bad, there's a reason. Think about it. They're not hunting one man in one world, but a man that occupies 2 realities, two worlds, Walt and Heisenberg. The choice of twin or dual assassins therefore becomes poetic and highly symbolic. By the time we get midway through Season 4, however, it's safe to say that the wave of possibility, or the superposition that Walt occupies between these two realities, has collapsed into a singular state, that of Heisenberg. Interestingly, the turning point may have been when Walt observes Jane dying and chooses not to help or save her. There is no uncertainty, at least as far as Walt is concerned. He's made his choice. The box that contains Schrödinger's cat is well and truly open, and the cat is dead, and has probably been dead for some time. It becomes clear that we are no longer observing a show about Walter White assuming the alias of the criminal Heisenberg in order to protect his family life. Rather, a show about Heisenberg assuming the alias of Walter White the family man in order to protect his criminal empire. The evolution from protagonist to antagonist is pretty much complete. Walt has embraced his new reality and is clear as to how he sees himself in the world. He's now occupying this singular reality. Not surprisingly, we tend to see less use of reflected images in scenes with Walt as a narrative device because he is no longer really occupying two states. We know we're looking at a man not just with the potential to commit evil acts, but a man who has and will continue to do so. The chaos that was threatening just below the surface is now loose upon the world.